This is Camille, and question number one. Uh, what inspires me to make video games? And that's pretty much because I love video games and I have played them most of my life. Um, I got into video games designing them in high school, and so that's pretty much what inspires me. I just really like them. My favorite games mostly consist of Halo, because that's pretty much what got me into the design phase aspect of video games. I like Assassin's Creed and Guild Wars, and I definitely like the old school games like Tetris and Twisted Metal. The final is pretty much what I expect to see out of Kodash. That's pretty much going, hopefully, in an exciting new direction. A fresh view on a number of different genres that has been missing for quite a while from a lot of games. And I think that it's going to take the stage and become a huge success. And that's the answer to my questions.
I was introduced to gaming at an early age. My parents actually introduced me with MS-DOS games like Captain Comic, and from there I started playing console games and went back to computer games and so on and so forth. What I discovered is that I really enjoy the multiplayer aspects of games. I think I spent a lot of time on a game called Grow Online, which was a 2D Zelda game, where there wasn't any real point to the game itself, but you made your own fun because it's all about interacting with people and forming relationships. And in the game itself, people would form guilds and clans and rivalries would form. Another thing that I found very enjoyable about games is the layers of discovery that were apparent. Once you start playing, you discover the basic mechanics, and as you dive deeper, you discover that there are other features that aren't really as readily known. For example, in one of my favorite games of all time, Dungeon Keeper 2, for those of you who aren't aware, it was a simulation game where you constructed dungeons, and each room had a specific function, and you would do this to attract creatures who would come and live and work in your dungeon and fight the forces of good. Anyway, they had a feature where you could possess a creature and walk around in your dungeon in first person, which normally you would be looking at it in top-down RTS view. So, in multiplayer, you would do battle with other players, and well, the creatures would battle each other, and after a battle, your creatures could, or during a battle, your creatures could be knocked unconscious. Depending on whose territory they got knocked out on, your imps or workers could collect their bodies and take them to prison cells. So in an online game, if one of your creatures is captured, the opposing player now has three options that they can take. They can let that prisoner starve to death and rise as a skeleton, which is in their benefit if they want a special unit. They could feed it, keep him alive, and deny you population count, or they could send that creature to the torture chamber and attempt to get map information or even convert that creature to their side. And it's just that little thing that I haven't seen repeated in any other game that I've played since that really caught my eye. Even if it does sound a little sadistic, I just thought it was pretty cool to have that kind of thought process or insight into the game to make it that much more dynamic. And again, if you're online and it happens that maybe a majority of your creatures are captured by the enemy player, you could actually possess one of your creatures, wander into his dungeon, attempt to get to his prison and pick the lock, and lead a prison raid out of his dungeon. So, when I actually discovered that game design could be a career, I'd have to say that I drew a lot of inspiration from Peter Molyneux, who had actually worked on Dungeon Keeper. And he's known for having a lot of fantastic ideas and innovations, but not always, but usually falls short of the hype. One small example of this level of detail or thought that Peter puts into his games is for a god simulation game called Black and White. He thought of a system where, while you're playing the game, you could connect to the internet, get your local weather conditions, and then implement them into the game. So if it's raining outside, it could be raining in your game. And it was those little details that I thought made the games that he designed and worked on more immersive and unique. I'm pursuing game design for two reasons. The first one is, I think like most people who play games is the more you experience them, or one game in particular, you start to pick up on where the game might have fell short or what things you would improve upon it, and you start to put together all these ideas about how you can make it better. And that's something that always drives me, is constantly having these ideas and how you can improve it. The second reason is that I like to learn. And making a game takes a lot more work than I think a lot of people realize. You're building a world from scratch at times, and every single system, mechanic, and feature that goes into the game has to be thoroughly thought out and implemented. So at times you might even be replicating real-life scenarios and physics and things like that. So it gives us an opportunity to dive deeper into all kinds of different fields and aspects of even daily life that we wouldn't normally think about. Maybe an example of this is when I was working on a 2D sword fighting game. I realized that I didn't quite have enough skill in animation, so it forced me to do some research on it, and also look into how sword fighting actually works and kind of techniques there are in swing and how it will look if I need to animate it. So after reading a lot and trying to get a better idea and grasp of animation, and trying to figure out what sort of sword style I wanted to emulate, I actually had to go and set up a camera and record myself swinging a sword in slow motion so that I could make the animations look a little bit better. And it's those little opportunities to learn that I think makes designing games exciting and dynamic, because you really never know what's going to come next. This project is my first attempt at really pursuing game design, and what I'd like to see from it is everyone who contributed to the project can come out with a feeling of pride that they worked on something that they can be proud of. As for the game itself, one thing that I really enjoy about gaming, and is probably the primary reason that I keep coming back, the moments that you get while you're playing online with your friends, and one of those 1 in 100 situations occurs where you happen to come out just barely alive or something, and it just pushes that adrenaline rush into you. And those moments of awe, or you feel like you're in a movie and experience things that you wouldn't have otherwise experienced. And what I like to see from Kodash is its ability to capture those moments of awe and put players in those situations where their adrenaline gets pumping and they remember those moments and feel like they're in a movie. And they come every so often, but when they do come, it's something that you really remember and it keeps you wanting to come back.
But what are some of your favorite games and why?
Well, I'd have to say my favorite type of games would be usually online co-op games where you can work with other people. I like single-player based games where you're alone and you do everything yourself. But games where you're online and talking to other people, or hanging out with your friends, is always a good way to go. So a game like Kodash would totally, pique my interest, especially for games that have multiplayer purposes.
Alright, so would you be interested in Kodash just because of its cooperative gameplay mechanics, or just the social mechanics, just the cooperative social mechanics in general?
I'm looking really forward to the cooperativeness to it, or however you would say that. Like, one person drives around and then the other person has to get out and do something to allow them to progress. Sounds pretty cool.
You gotta rely on each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, so then, what inspires you about game design, or art, and what kind of art do you prefer?
Well, overall, I prefer digital art over any other kind of art, because it allows, you can share it a little more easier than conventional art.
Alright.
So you can spread it around a little more. It's a little easier to do. A lot of people, I feel like, would be much better, drawing on like Photoshop, or then, putting together a mosaic or something like that. Some arty that, allows people to work better.
Alright. But what are you hoping to see come out of Kodash?
Lots of replayability. I don't want to get bored with it.
Okay.
Getting bored with games is terrible. That's why single-player games get kind of boring after a while. Once you beat it, what do? nothing unless it really has a multiplayer. But games like Call of Duty, all the multiplayer is the same, so it's basically an expansion pack. I don't want to see that in that game. And
Okay.
for $10 game, yeah, I feel like
about it.
yeah, I feel like games like that just repeat themselves. Just they have different mechanics to the game or whatever. It's still the same game overall.
So, in your own words, what inspires you artistically, and what drives you to want to get into the game design business?
I would have to say, expressing my creativity with the world. I come up with these crazy ideas in my head, like crazy worlds that I can picture perfectly in my head, and I want to share them with the world. I want to design a place you could walk through and see the scenery that I've come up with in my own head. I would love to share my imagination with everyone else. That's really what intrigues me about game design.
What sort of games did you specifically grow up on, or what sort of games would you consider to be your favorite?
Well, I grew up on Duke Nukem 3D, shooting up aliens, but I've drifted a lot towards strategy games and RPG games. I feel they have they're a little more in depth than just running around and gunning people down. Strategy games, I really have to think about what I have to do. It's a very good mental exercise, whereas RPGs have a very deep story, and that's what I like about RPG games.
Okay. What are you hoping to see come out of a game like Kodash?
Something different every time you play. You want to get together with your friends and have a great time, like we did with Halo. Like Halo 3, we have LAN parties, and every time we would screw around and do something different. You want to have fun with your friends. The competitiveness against other players around the world is nice too, but the whole point of this is to have fun.
Okay. I agree with that, actually, 100%.
Are you even allowed to ask me that question? I don't know if I can answer that. I'll try. So what do I hope to see out of Kodash? The social interaction, I guess I'd say. I want to be able to take a bunch of players who don't know each other and have them go from one moment to where it's kind of that free-for-all in every conventional, familiar sense to dynamically and fluidly form a tribe of one, if only for a moment, to bring down a common obstacle. Be that obstacle a mini-boss, a puzzle, a barrier, what have you. I want them to just dynamically form these teams, these parties, these tribes, then be able to split off from that. All within the same track, all within the same level, all within the same game. I think that'd be a pretty cool mechanic, and be even cooler if we could pull it off, which it's looking like we'll be able to. What inspires me to make video games? That's a really good question. Well, you see, all the game really is a contemporary means to tell a story. And we've been telling stories all our lives. Around campfires, at school when we were still going through school, our day-to-day lives, our jobs, everywhere. So, a video game is it's another means of expressing the stories that we want to tell. That's kind of what inspires me about games, is not only does it present the opportunity to convey and give a really good, awesome story, but it allows you to throw in so much raw emotion, originality, creativity, ingenuity, all these different things that other mediums don't really offer. I mean, you can get a movie, for instance, and don't get me wrong, movies are obviously awesome ways to convey a story. You can get your emotion out there, but you lack a certain degree of human connection, I guess, for lack of better words. I think a game is able to hit that. Now, that being said, a story can be told through the non-conventional sense, I think. Sure, you can take a game like a Mass Effect or Bioshock, and those are freaking awesome, amazing stories. I love them, and I'm huge fans of them both. But you can take a game that's purely multiplayer, and you're still gonna be having people who are experiencing their own stories as they progress and as they play through. And I think it's precisely that reason right there, the dynamics that can go into a video game, into the stories, and into the raw emotion that a video game can provoke. I think that's what inspires me to make video games. I think that's what gives me the drive to continue. Alright, so what are my favorite games? Again, another good question. Well, growing up, it's actually a mixed bag, kind of like it's like a redheaded stepchild, really. On one end of the spectrum, I was in love with the Final Fantasy games, particularly Final Fantasy Tactics, which later went on to be War of the Lions, which I have for my PSP. I love that little brick. And Final Fantasy VII, that really stood out in terms of a really engrossing story. I remember just being so upset when Eris died in that game. On another end of that spectrum, I was really into the Command & Conquer games, primarily Tiberian Sun and its expansions. I love the strategy, and I love the thinking, and just the risk, and the fact that you could control so much. That really just kind of stood out to me. Then lastly, it was somewhat newer than both of those. I'm sure I'll get flack for this, but I liked Spyro. I'll admit it. For some reason, I like that little purple dragon. Sure, he's lame now. Not as cool as he used to be. I look at it like Star Wars. He started off strong, ended weak.